I'm your instructor, Sarvishta Patnaik. I will introduce you in this particular session the module from the discipline sociology. So in this particular session, I'll give you some basic idea about environment in social science, particularly in the discipline of sociology. You must be aware of the fact that there are the natural aspects of understanding the environment, which encompasses the interaction of all living species, climate, weather, and natural resources that affect the human survival. In this one session, I will introduce one basic concept of social aspect of the environment, how there is a strong intersection between the environment, the society, economy, and development. So the broader theme of the concept that I will discuss in this one session is called as environmentalism of the poor debate. There are 5 sub-themes in this particular session, in this particular one concept. So you'll find during the course of my discussion how these 5 themes are very much interrelated with the broader concept called as environmentalism of the poor. So for this one session, for understanding this concept, one reading has been suggested. So this one reading is recommended, which has been extracted from the book titled Varieties of Environmentalism, Essays North and South. So the authors are Ramachandra Guha and Joan Martinez Alayer. The reading which has been recommended for this particular session is the chapter 1, which is titled as Environmentalism of the Poor. And this particular book also deals with a number of case studies and very solid examples from the way the environment is understood in the context of global north and then the global south. Now, before coming into the detail of this environmentalism of the poor concept, let me give you a brief idea how the concept of sustainable development is dealt with in understanding the global north and then the global south dimension of understanding development and environment before going into the detail of this concept which is called as environmentalism of the poor. In the previous session, you must have learned about the concept of sustainable development in detail. So the sustainable development, which is a contested concept, which is presented as the intersection between the environment, the society, the social, and then the economy, and feature conceived of as separate entities and are also connected entities with each other. So in this particular diagram, you can see that the concept of sustainable development is the concept which aims to integrate and reconcile the economic, the social, and then the environmental aspects within a holistic and balanced sustainable development framework. So, sustainable development as a concept and as a definition which first emerged in the World Commission on Environment and Development Conference in the year 1987. And this particular concept it also emerged for the first time in the Brundtland Commission report, and the report is titled as Our Common Future. So this is the strong definition of the sustainable development which appeared in the report, which defines the concept as meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their basic needs. So if we go strictly with the definition of the sustainable development, there are two other definitions that emerge and that provide two basic concepts. The first, the concept of present needs of the world's poor to which overriding priority should be given. And second, the idea of limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. On the basis of these two concepts, you can find that the sustainable development or the goal of the sustainability doesn't meet in many of the circumstances because the power relations are always concentrated within the domain of economy or the economic factor or the economic domain. So the result is that an unsustainable situation occurs when the natural capital is used faster than it can be replenished. Not only that, but in the policy making also, it has often been ignored the social and environmental dimensions of sustainable development because the power relation is always concentrated within the economic sphere, which is one of the most crucial reasons of maintaining a holistic and balanced sustainable development framework. So therefore, the the objective is hardly met in the context of making any development initiative sustainable. So therefore, whenever there is an imbalance or an imperfect balance is maintained between the development and environment aspect, always these four questions it appear in the agenda. Who should have access the resources? Who should control the resources? How does equity is maintained? And why there is the conflict situation which occurs on the basis of maintaining the sustainability. So therefore, when you talk about the debate on conflicts within the sustainable development, the conflict arises between the present and then the future generations, human well-being and the protection of nature, between the poor and then the rich, and between the local and global. Local and global in the context of the way the regional conflict is also seen, the way the conflicts within the countries, across the countries, the transnational debate, and so on and so forth. Now, let me discuss in detail about the various sub-themes of the concept of environmentalism of the poor. So first is the history of environmentalism. So this history of environmentalism is the concept or the theme that I'm going to discuss because my purpose is to give you a very basic idea about the emergence of environmental awareness in the global north and global south and how does this particular awareness emerge in the global history of environment. I'll give you an idea how and when the knowledge and awareness started in the world or started to begin in the world about the environment and its degradation. So this period can also be said as the period about environmental awareness which emerged through the publications, the international and UN summits, the active participation of many activists, social workers, the civil society organizations, and so on and so forth. So the first slide you can see here, the environmental awareness in the globe and in India. So this slide, it talks about, it gives you a basic idea about the environmental awareness or the environmentalism per se in the global north. North denotes to the Western society and South denotes to the Eastern India, in Eastern society, India, and then the other countries. So this is the picture of the pioneer biologist Rachel Carson and her book Silent Spring. So Larches Carson, the Silent Spring debate is about, an environmental science book which was published in the year 1962. And this particular book, it documented the adverse effects of the environment due to the indiscriminate use of pesticides. So Carson, in the late 1980s, she turned her attention to conservation. Her focus was on environmental conservation, particularly when she looked at the environmental problems that she believed were caused because of the synthetic pesticides. So the result was the publication of the Silent Spring, which brought environmental awareness among the American public. So in this book, Carson written about the impacts of poisonous chemicals, particularly the DDT, dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, on the environment. This book had raised tremendous public consciousness, and it also led to the emergence of environmental movement in the US. So the participants of these movements, one of the most interesting factor in this environmental movement in US, we can find that the participants in this movement in the global north are the middle class and upper class people who have the concern for the nature, but in a different way. So how it is in a different way, I'll just come little later. And the second picture, you can see the pioneer economist, the British economist E.S. Schumacher, and his book The Small is Beautiful. So this book was also published the same decade, uh, in the 1970s, and this book was also a, so to say, called classic, because it has sold during that time nearly more than 1 million copies, and therefore it deserves as a classic. And one of the most popular and famous chapter in the book is called as Buddhist economics. Schumacher is also is also called as a Buddhist economist, and who opposed neither technology nor global development nor entrepreneurship. And what he promptly promoted was that the idea of technology should have always a human face. The technology should be appropriate, the technology should be intermediate. So during this period, the publication of these two pioneer volumes brought about a tremendous impact on the American and Western public about uh, the, the awareness of the environmental problems. And then there was the 1972 Stockholm Conference, which you all must be aware of this. This is the first global summit, the international conference on the topic sustainable development. In this particular conference, the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, she made a very famous statement called as she made this statement, which is known as poverty is the greatest polluter. So, what are the post Stockholm impacts? In the global arena, we can find there are the publication of many of the journals. There are series of UN conference throughout in 1970s on the topic population, food, women, human settlement, water, desertification, primary health care, world development, and so on. And there was also the regulation on convention and international treaties on endangered species, which was introduced in 1973. There was the publication of Losing Ground by ECOMS, particularly on the environmental stress and the impact on the world food situation. And this particular year, uh, or maybe like after some years in the early 1980s, in the post Stockholm conference, the impact was also very greatly seen in India. So the result was the publication of Down to Earth magazine, or the Down to Earth journal. So Down to Earth is the first of its kind in India, and which is published from Center for Science and Environment, the State of India's Environment Report, which was published by Center for Science and Environment. It is one of the leading fortnight journal. It was the leading fortnight journal during that time, and still it is also now one of the leading journal, which aims at increasing public awareness on science, technology, environment, and development. So in the year 1985, the Center for Science and Environment, which carried its first citizen report in developing about uh, the way environmental destruction, it affects the women, the rural women, particularly in the context of Chipko movement. It received a very strong nationwide attention. The post-Stockholm conference also brought about the changes in the policy in the national committee, in the governance and in the law. For example, there was the formation of NDTY committee in 1972, a national committee on environmental planning and coordination, which was established in the Department of Science and Technology. And there is also the introduction of the environmental studies programs for the first time in schools. And there is also the Supreme Court judgment for environmental studies, which was introduced in higher education. Then, after 1982, there are widespread awareness about this environmental degradation. But in the policy circle, you can find that the more and more environmental laws it was being framed after the Bhopal gas tragedy. The Bhopal gas tragedy, the Bhopal disaster, also referred as the Bhopal gas tragedy due to the leak of the poisonous gas, and it was world's worst industrial disaster. And this particular incident, it happened in Bhopal in the year 1984 due to the release of the UCIL pesticide at a plant in the Bhopal in MP. So, as per the official record, more than 5 lakh people are exposed to this MIC gas and other chemicals, and therefore the cause of this disaster remains always under debate. So this Bhopal gas tragedy was a catastrophe that had no parallel in the world's industrial history. But interestingly, these were the laws which were being framed in our governance system prior to Bhopal gas tragedy, and after Bhopal gas tragedy, there are more broad-based laws which are being implemented in the pictures. So the Environmental Protection Act for the first time in 1986, it also emerged, and the National Conservation Strategy and the Policy Statement on the Environment 1992, it also emerged. Now, coming to the second sub-theme of the broader theme, environmentalism of the poor, or which is called as the north-south dimension of environment or environmentalism. So when you look at the various issues all over the world, there are the concepts and consensus involved. As I just said, that how environment is understood in the context of first world and how it is also understood to the people in the third world. So there are many arguments in the north which go on that there has been a common assumption among the scholars in the 1960s and 70s, just before the Stockholm Conference, was that the concerns over the issues of conservation and also the protection of the biodiversity were exclusively the preserve of the affluent Westerners, the American North, because of the ultimate luxury of the consumer society. And the third world countries, India and then the other Asian countries. So the citizens of the world's poorest countries, they have been named as, they uh, they run this conventional wisdom that they have nothing to gain from the environmental concerns because they are too poor to be green. So this particular popular statement they hold with themselves with this assumption that these poor countries are too poor to be green. So in the reading which I have suggested, that environmentalism of the poor, the chapter 1 from the book, you can find from page number 16 to 21 this north-south debate of environmentalism through various ecological conflicts and rhetoric of environmental movement in India. So read that section from the reading for this particular theme. And in this particular slide, you can find that there is a clear-cut mention of the differences between the two environment. So the environmentalism of the poor debate. It is being challenged on the basis of the imperialism of the North and imperialism of the South. The imperialism of the North is called as ecology of affluence, and environmentalism of the South is called as the Southern challenge. Now, imperialism of the North, being as an ecology of affluence, is referred as a full stomach environmentalism, and the imperialism of the South is called as empty belly environmentalism. So these are some of the uh, varieties of imperialism in the globe: the North, South, or West East environmentalism. Here you can find the differences between the affluent countries, particularly the imperialism of the North and environmentalism of the South, which has been divided and distinguished on the basis of materialist and non-materialist perspective. So here, the environmental justice movement, the anti-Negro movement carries the brand of the environmental movements of the global North with the perspective of the affluent society. And here, the quality of life values and increased appreciation of natural amenities and the cultural shift to post-materialism is also very much understood. Whereas, in the context of the poor countries, which is labeled as the imperialism of the poor, there has been a strong debate of the defense of the community rights in the perspective of meeting their livelihoods and the community or the communal access to natural resources. So, in the context of the global south or the environmentalism in poor countries, it is much more of a biocentric, based on a biocentric Eastern religion. And there are also reactions against environmental degradation, which is caused, or which also causes the poverty, and which is also a factor due to population growth, and so on and so forth. And there is also a concept which is called as ecofeminism, how the environmental degradation is also understood or perceived in the context of the nature society relationship, particularly from the lens of the women or gender. Now, the environmentalism of the North, as I said, is referred as the full stomach environmentalism, and the environmentalism of the South is called as empty belly environmentalism. So, therefore, in this particular context, you can find that how the authors in this particular book and in the chapter which has been recommended for this particular session, that in varieties of environmentalism, Ramchandra Guha and Martinez Allayer, they they seek to articulate the values and the orientation of the environmentalism of the poor, and they try to explore the conflicting priorities of the South and then the North that were so dramatically highlighted in the Rio Summit Conference in the year 1992. Therefore, the environmentalism of the North is labeled as ecology of affluence, and environmentalism of the South is called as environmentalism of the poor. Because why the environmentalism of the North is called as environmentalism of the affluence? It is one of the uniquely Western phenomena because they rely heavily on the cult of wilderness, the environmental justice movement, and also they rely more heavily on the organizations which are called as social movement organizations like Syria Club, Friends of the Earth, and so on. Whereas the imperialism of the southern world, here the awareness on the environmental protection and environmental degradation, it draws heavily from the struggles of the marginal people and the marginal communities, the grassroots communities. So these communities, they come within the category of hill peasants, tribal communities, fishermen, displaced farmers, and so on. So there are also other examples apart from Chipko. So there are also other examples cited in the reading. So the Chipko movement and KPL movement in Karnataka are the two readings discussed in this particular reading, but there are also other examples like Sada Sarbar project and the Teri, the dam project, the mining issues and conflict, the Silent Valley in Kerala, the Single in West Bengal, the Coke Plachibar in Kerala, and the recent Jaitapur struggle in the Ratnagiri district. So that is why the environmentalism of the north is referred to as ecology of affluence and the south is called as environmentalism of the poor. Now, coming directly to this particular concept, environmentalism of the poor. Before I go into the detail of explaining and elaborating this particular concept, let me give you an extract from the passage which has been published in Down to Earth by its editor and by its founder, Anil Agrawal. So he writes, the first lesson is that the main source of environmental destruction in the world is the demand for natural resources generated by the consumption of the rich, whether they are the rich nations or individuals and groups within the nations. The second lesson is that it is the poor who are affected the most by environmental destruction. So Anil Agrawal, who was an environmentalist and the founder and director of Center for Science and Environment, it is based in Delhi, this particular organization. So Anil Agrawal was a pioneer environmentalist, a man of science as well as thinker, a rare combination, and he was also a visionary thinker. He spent his whole lifetime in advocating the policies and practices that allow people to manage their natural resources by themselves and by learning from India's traditions and heritage. So, when we talk about or discuss or understand about environmentalism of the poor debate, it is about the resistance of the conflict. It is about a kind of, a kind of umbrella term. It is about a kind of umbrella term where the poor confront the rich. And it is about the ecological conflicts that arise in various regions in India. So the environmentalism of the poor, the debate which has been discussed and argued by the scholar Ramchandra Guha in the reading, it gives us two main examples. The resistance against KPL and the Chipko movement. So please read this particular reading on the movement about KPL, the movement in Karnataka, the resistance against Karnataka Pulpwood Limited, and this particular resistance we started in the year 1984, where the government of Karnataka made an agreement with Harrier Polyfibers. So what was the problem? So KPL, which is called as the Karnataka Polyfiber Limited, this particular company, it was charged with growing eucalyptus and other fast-growing species of trees for the use by the polyfiber company. So for this, more than 30,000 hectares of common land, which was spread over 4 districts in Karnataka, were granted by the state to this company. So the project, it overlooked grossly the claims of the local villagers who depended on these lands to meet their basic needs. And there was a very widespread protest which erupted in the region from the local villagers and several non-governmental organizations. And finally, in the year 1991, the government called up the KPL. So it was a kind of sustained struggle which continued for more than 7 years. And because of the strong protest by the local villagers, by the civil society organizations, 72 legislators from various political parties, they brought effective pressure on the government to close this KPL. So it was a success story. So not only KPL, but there is also another similar protest which has also been discussed in this particular reading by the authors. So that is the Chipko movement in the Garhwal Himalayas. So this particular movement, it just uh, existed just one decade before this KPL movement was fought. And it was also fought with the similar lines due to the protest by the peasants, by the hill tribals, by the women's who didn't have the access to the forest resource. Okay, so therefore, Chipko, KPL, or Narmada Bachao Andolan, starting from the 1960s and reaching to its global prominence in the 1980s. India has witnessed a series of popular movements in defense of community rights to natural resources. So, therefore, environmentalism of the poor concept is understood as an umbrella term where the poor confront the rich. Most of these conflicts have pitted rich against poor. So the particular definition you can find in the reading how and why environmentalism of the poor concept is defined as an environmentalism of the poor as an umbrella term, and why there has been the debate about that most of these conflicts are pitted rich against poor. For instance, the logging companies against village Adivasis or the hill villagers, the dam builders against forest tribal communities, multinational corporations against the fish trawlers, and how uh, the way these trawlers they also use and extract the coastal resources against the traditional fisher folk in small boats. So therefore, in this particular fight, one party, that is the loggers or the trawlers, they seek to set up the pace of resource exploitation to give service to an expanding commercial or the industrial economy. So this process it involves either partial or total disposition of these communities or the displacement of these communities who earlier had the access over their resources. So that is in question and whose own patterns of utilization are less destructive to the environment. So one important factor in the whole debate of decentralism of the poor debate is that the the marginalized people or the poor people are solely dependent upon these resources for their survival of their livelihood, and they are the most sufferers and then the victims of this environmental degradation. So I'll give you the example of Chipko movement, the KPL movement, and its various way of understanding about the vocabulary of protest, about the genesis of the movement, about the politics, and the way the movement has been understood from other dimensions. So it has been very elaborately discussed in the chapter. So you please read that particular movement and its various characteristics. I'll give you the brief idea about the Chipko movement, which has also been fought in the similar line. This has also been briefly discussed in the chapter by Ramchandra Guha in that particular chapter. So this is just a solid example of the imperialism of the poor, which has been discussed by Ramchandra Guha, by Matthias Allaire, and also the other scholars in the Indian environmental movement in India and abroad. This is a very interesting picture. In this particular slide, you can see that here this particular picture it dates back to some early 18th century, and how the women they are hugging the trees. So they are hugging the trees, and how and they are also being beaten by some kingsmen. And this particular picture, it is also a group of women. They are hugging the trees. So the idea of showing this particular picture is that Chipko movement, which we know about or which we are aware about, the strong protest movement in the global history and the first environmental movement in the world, not only in India, in the first environmental movement in the world, which was fought in the line of the defense of community rights for protection of their livelihood, which is also a popular protest, which is also a grassroots movement. But this particular movement, it didn't start first in the Garhwal Himalayas in the 1970s. The Chipko movement first started in the 18th century in the state of Rajasthan. A very strong and popular social women leader or the reformer called as Amrita Devi in that particular state in Rajasthan with 84 villages. They risked their lives to protect the forests from being felled due to the order of the then king, the Maharaja. So therefore, this particular movement during that time in 18th century, it was also being fought and practiced on the basis of the Gandhian methods of satyagraha. And women played one of the most important role in this movement. So this particular village was called the Khezali village, and the communities they are the Bishnoi communities who sacrificed their lives for protecting their trees, which is considered as sacred for by the community. So gradually, a very strong rising awareness it emerged in the region and circulated and spread out over the other regions about the ecological crisis which came from an immediate loss of the livelihoods caused by it and which also resulted in the growth of political activism in the region. So Chipko movement or Chipko Andolan, we started in the Garhwal Himalayas in the 1970s. It was primarily a forest conservation movement and it went on becoming a rallying point for many future environmental movements as well. So it occurred at a time in the Garhwal Himalayas when there was hardly any environmental movement in the developing world. And as I said, as like Kipil movement, it is also a success story movement. So the success meant that the world immediately noticed the mechanism of this movement, that is the non-violent means of the movement practice with the objective of slowing down the rapid deforestation, increase the ecological awareness, and demonstrate the viability of the people's power. So therefore, Chipko in global history is named is a popular movement in the line of the first global environmental movement and the first feminist movement as well, the eco-feminist movement. So the success story of the movement, it also goes in the line of not only the participants, the way the women they were at the forefront of this movement, but also there was the active participation and the support of the two uh, mega social workers. One was, and then the social activist. One is Chandi Prasad Bhatt and another is Sundarlal Bahuguna. So Chandi Prasad Bhatt, uh, he's a strong social reformer as well as a social activist. And in the year 1964, he established the DGSS, which is called as Dashali Gram Swaraj Sangh, a society for village self-rule. It was set up by Chandi Prasad Bhatt uh, as a uh, as a uh, way of bringing together the villagers and in order to lead the movement in the line of the Sarvodaya and Satyagraha. So during the Chipko Andolan, the Galwal Himalayas, because of the efforts of these social reformers and activists, soon became the center for rising ecological awareness of how reckless deforestation had destroyed much of the forest cover in the region, and which has also resulted in the devastating Alkalanda river flood in during the uh, year 1970, July 1970. Another important, the prominent Chipko leader who is also a Gandhian activist is called as Sundarlal Bahuguna and who took more than 5,000 kilometers of trans-Himalayan foot march from the year 1981 till 1983, continuously for long 2 years, through spreading the masses, the Chipko masses, to a far greater area for its conservation. So the Chipko movement, these two great social reformers and the activist Chandiprasad Phut was awarded the Ramar Magsaysay Award in the year 1982, and Sundarlal Bahuguna also uh, uh, was awarded Padma Vibhushan in 2009. Now, this Chipko movement in the global history, it became one of the most pioneer movements in the global history as the first environmental movement which was fought in the line of the defense of community rights by the local people. It is a strong grassroots movement. It is the first feminist movement in eco-feminist movement in the world also. So the Chipko movement is one of the strong instances of ecological conflicts and environmental movements, and can be also called as the environmentalism of the poor in India. This has been very strongly asserted by Ramchandra Guha, who very rightly asserted in his book Unquietudes. So here he has asserted that Chipko is the largest in a long series of peasant protests going back to the turn of the century against commercial forestry in the Uttar Pradesh, Himalayan, and in this particular state. So here a quick and interesting question comes to our mind. Is Chipko a success story? Of course, the quick answer is that yes, Chipko is a successful story. The movement's major success it came in 1980, when a very strong appeal it came from the social reformer Sundarlal Bahuguna to the then Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and she ordered a ban for commercial felling, a 15-year ban on commercial felling in the Uttarakhand Himalayas. So not only that, there are also similar bans which were enacted in the Himalayan region and in most part of the Uttarachal region as well. So therefore, how does we understand the environmentalism of the poor debate is not the only question, but apart from these nature-based conflicts in India, the environmentalism of the poor also illustrates another major dimension. It highlights the relationship between the poverty and the environmental degradation among the communities who depend upon uh, the immediate environment for their basic survival. And wherever there is an environmental degradation, so these particular communities they are the most sufferers. So therefore, the scholars they also argue that there is a very strong connection between environmental degradation and the poverty, particularly in the global south. So this has been argued again by Ramchandra Guha and Magnus Alayer, and you can also find uh, the arguments based on the various nature-based conflicts in India in the reading. So the scholars of Indian orientalism and then the abroad they argue this particular fact by showing the fact that because the poor rely directly on the land and its natural resources, and because that they have an intrinsic motivation to be the careful managers of the environmental uh, uh, the environment and their immediate habitat. So therefore, whenever there is a case of environmental degradation or deterioration, how these people they become the most sufferers and the victims of this environmental catastrophe or the environmental degradation. But this is not only the case with the Chipko movement or the KPL. India has seen a series of popular struggles during the post 1980s onward. And for example, there are examples of dam and multipurpose projects, Peri, Namadabja Andolan, and Silent Valley in Kerala. So, Namadabja Andolan is also a kind of environmental movement which consists of Adivasis, farmers, and environmentalists and human rights activists who protest against the number of large dams being built across the Narmada. So the question about the cost benefit analysis of the electricity generation, irrigation, and also creating the jobs, and how it has also become a focal point of the movement on the basis of the uh, debate or the aim of providing irrigation electricity to the people in three major states. Similarly, the Coke Plachimara struggle in Kerala, the struggle against Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverage Private Limited, or HCCBPL. So this is a bottling plant at Plachimara in the southern state of Kerala. So over the next few years, from 2001 to 2003, so the area surrounding this plant, they began to feel the ill effects of the uh, uh, Hindustan Coca-Cola Beverage Private Limited, its ill effects of the groundwater contamination and the toxic waste released from this particular the bottling plant. So therefore, the environmental conflicts is deep rooted in India. The concerns and protest against the big dams, thermal power plants, mining, and other infrastructure projects. These are all widespread. These conflicts are not only one to just protect the trees or birds and animals, but how to protect the livelihoods of the vast uh, mass of the society and protect the livelihoods, the right to live, the culture, the way of life, the identity, and above all, the rule of law, and then the democracy itself. So, therefore, all these protests, whether it is the KPL in Karnataka, the Chikku in Karo Himalayas, the Narmada in the Narmada Valley, so all these three movements are understood within the framework of the environmentalism of the poor debate through a vocabulary of protest. So, it is more uh, elaborated explicitly in the ecological terms by these authors in this particular reading. So, this last sub-theme of environmentalism of the poor debate is called as iron triangle approach. So, it is a kind of explicit ecological term which has been used by the scholars while describing about the concept environmentalism of the poor. So one of the important concept introduced by these authors in the book is the concept of iron triangle approach in the context of environmentalism or environmentalism of the poor. So what is this particular concept? The iron triangle approach, it brings about a kind of understanding about the use and abuse of natural resources by three groups of people: by the resource omnibus, by the ecological people who are called as the ecosystem people, and the ecological refugees. So the resource omnibus, they refer the people uh, or the vast number of the resource omnibus, they refer as the powerful people, the bureaucrats, and the national elites. So who use the resources, who extract the resources for the benefit of uh, in terms of like centralizing the power and then the pattern of development. And this particular group of people, they are a kind of people who use these resources at the cost of these ecosystem people. With a diminishing resource use, their subsistence becomes more precarious. And this ecosystem people, this term which has been used by Ramchandra Guha, it refers to a kind of system approach. So where these particular groups like the marginalized farmers, the hill villagers, the tribals, the fisher folk, and the pastoralist, and the people who directly depend on the environment. So they have been termed as the ecosystem people. So these landless and marginal farmers, these artisans, so how they end up by becoming ecological refugees. So this iron triangle approach, these groups, these ecosystem people from this iron triangle approach, it is understood that This particular group, they join the rank of impoverished migrants and become laborers within the urban slums. When they have become displaced, they become destitute from the resources, from their immediate environment due to the resource extraction by these resource omnivores, these powerful groups. And they joined in the rank of impoverished migrant laborers within the urban slums. So making urban population again overcrowded. So therefore, Guha and Martinez Alayer in the reading, they have argued that the pattern of development can be attributed to the dominance in Indian society of an iron triangular approach of politicians and bureaucrats who use public resources to extend the patronage and to receive support from industry, the large landowners in the urban middle class population who were called as the resource omnivores. So therefore, this is especially true in the sphere of natural resource management and especially in India. And this particular way of understanding the centralized state power in the hands of the technical and scientific experts, which is justified in the name of national interest. So, how India's rich traditions of decentralized governance, especially in the sphere of natural resource management, have been dismantled. So, therefore, the reading which is recommended is discuss the imperialism of the poor debate as the resistance offered by the ecosystem people to the process of resource capture by the omnivores, whether it is in case of KPL or Sada Sarovar project or Narmada Bachao Andolan or the Chipko movement. The movement represents the ecosystem people's resistance and how they face severe displacement, whether it is due to the huge dam on Narmada River or maybe in the case of the Silent Valley project or maybe in case of KPL, same is the case in each and every kind of ecological conflicts debate in India. And this particular approach is coming under the rubric of a vocabulary of protest within the larger debate of environmentalism of the poor. So here I conclude my session and hope all of you you have got a good insight and a basic understanding of the concept and the debate on environmentalism in India and the environmentalism of the poor. So, in this context of the environmentalism of the poor debate, so how it has been contested, how it has been debated by these two scholars, by these two authors in this particular reading, so that will help you in a bigger way how to understand the nuanced understanding of this concept through various sub themes. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you.